Good afternoon. I want to thank the U.S. Chamber of Commerce for bringing us all together here on the eve of the Washington Summit to focus on the importance of our allied defense industries. So to all of you who make things for or provide services to NATO military forces, or that maybe only allied forces need, from the prime contractors to the tens of thousands of sub-tier suppliers and communities throughout NATO countries, thank you for supporting and supplying everything we need to defend the alliance. The ships and submarines, the stealth aircraft and small arms, the tanks, troops carriers, missiles, mortars, and more. Our alliance and our warfighters rely on what you do, just as economic growth relies on a secure, stable environment. So we're in this together. And the same is true for our respective national defense industries on both sides of the Atlantic. For as long as we've been allies, they too have been intertwined, sometimes by coincidence, sometimes by design. 80 years ago last month, when U.S. Army Rangers reached the base of Pointe du Hoc's cliffs, they arrived on British landing craft, not the American-made Higgins boats that you might have expected. In the 1950s and 60s, when NATO pilots needed jets to counter Soviet MiG-15s, 4 European allies co-produced Lockheed F-104G starfighters with a central coordination office under NATO auspices. Meanwhile, while the U.S. military sought weapons to defend against Warsaw Pact tanks, they bought the pioneering technology, 3 types of French wire-guided anti-tank missiles, forerunners to what many of our forces use today. Ever since, the ties that bind the transatlantic defense industry have endured and evolved over many decades and multiple continents. From NATO's STANAGs that continually enhance our interoperability in Europe, to the U.S. Marine Corps' most recent use of Norwegian-developed naval strike missiles for novel operational concepts in the Indo-Pacific region. And today, as we gather for NATO's 75th anniversary summit, the Transatlantic Alliance Industrial Base is at a pivotal moment. The COVID pandemic revealed how fragile and brittle supply chains had become. The war in Ukraine revealed how nation-state aggression is a real threat, requiring information-age ingenuity and industrial-era capacity. And the rapid defense industrial expansion of our strategic competitors has revealed how defense industries across the Atlantic were affected by decades of inconsistent funding and blinkered demand signals. Together, our task is to deliver combat-credible capabilities to our warfighters at speed and scale so they can deter aggression against NATO populations and territory and win if called to fight. But the truth is, no engine of production has ever spun up from 0 to 60 overnight. And that's why Secretary Austin has said the most important thing we'll do this year for the future of NATO is strengthen our defense industry. For most of NATO's existence, many of our countries could tolerate years and decades-long timelines, when at most we faced a single strategic competitor that was relatively slow and lumbering. But this is not the Cold War or the post-Cold War era. Even as we face the threat of Russian aggression in Europe, we also cannot ignore the global pacing challenge presented by the People's Republic of China. So we have to double down with urgency and confidence. In light of these challenges, and especially in response to Putin's latest war of aggression in Ukraine, we've seen NATO become larger, stronger, and more united than ever before, as you've just heard detailed by our National Security Advisor and, of course, NATO's Secretary General. Now, while we've come a long way, none of us should think it's enough. Why? Because Vladimir Putin has put Russia's economy on a war footing. He's preparing for the long haul, even reassessing Russia's nuclear doctrine, and he wants to buy, beg, or borrow whatever capability he can from his ad hoc arsenal of autocracies, even if endemic corruption should make their quality suspect, and even in violation of UN sanctions. In his desperation, he'll do anything to fuel the fires of war in Ukraine, no matter how it affects his handful of benefactors in Pyongyang, Tehran, and Beijing. But the tried and true nature of our NATO alliance is an asymmetric advantage those countries will never outmatch. They don't understand what it means to train together like we do, to plan together, exercise together, and operate together. Because it takes more than just landing at each other's airfields or sailing ships alongside each other for a few days at a time. Our alliance goes much deeper. We trust each other to defend each other, and we uphold our pledge to fight together, sweat together, bleed together, and make the ultimate sacrifice together. Indeed, the United States will never forget how NATO allies did so alongside us after 9/11, because we know Article 5 is ironclad for all of us. And of course, we buy capabilities together and from each other, not because we have no other choice, but because our interoperability and the strength of our collective industrial base is a force multiplier. It makes us more formidable than any adversaries we might face. Our competitors can only dream of that. So I know we have what it takes, not just to compete, but to outcompete and prevail. And that includes ensuring we are prepared for the possibility of protracted war, which every ally must prepare for, and not just in Europe either. Even as we seek to deter aggression against all NATO allies, we know that competitors and adversaries always get a vote, so we have to be ready for whatever may come. As part of that, we must accelerate the growth of our collective defense industrial capacity and production to deliver at greater speed and scale together. Adding more shifts on current production lines is not enough. We need to add more lines, build more factories and facilities, and bring more producers into the fold. Make no mistake, expanding transatlantic defense industrial capacity is not a nice to do, it's a need to do, a must do for the NATO alliance, key to meeting our deterrence and defense objectives today, tomorrow, and for the foreseeable future. Specifically, we need even more large-scale multinational procurement, going beyond the remarkable achievements we've seen in the last few years. We need to keep securing supply chains because the integrity and resilience of sub-tier components and suppliers is imperative in this era of strategic competition. We need to more rapidly and responsibly adopt new technologies wherever they can add military value, like additive manufacturing, biotech, and all-domain attritable autonomous systems. We have to keep improving the interoperability and interchangeability of allied capabilities, leveraging modular open system architectures and NATO standards. That matters for software too, not just hardware. The more we integrate commercial off the shelf, the faster we can iterate. We have to keep tackling workforce challenges, including by leveraging national kickstart investments that can benefit the defense industrial base, like we're doing here in the United States by funding to expand US production of semiconductors and clean energy. And we also must step up international defense industry cooperation with like-minded democracies wherever we can, with NATO allies and non-NATO partners, without letting that stop us from delivering what NATO must deliver for the alliance. Because the truth is, whether it's a new production facility on the European continent funded primarily by EU investments, or co-production or co-sustainment with US Indo-Pacific partners like Australia, Japan, and the Republic of Korea, when fellow democracies work together to build and sustain things that NATO allies use, allies can perhaps one day buy and benefit from them, and that's good for all of us. And that is why now 12 nations in both Europe and the Indo-Pacific are working together to increase access to and capacity from the Indo-Pacific region, as we look to establish global resilience in defense supply chains. I know for years the phrase arsenal of democracy was understood to mean how U.S. defense industry and that alone supported the Allied war effort. But those days are long over. Today's arsenal of democracy is not only American, it's not only Western either. Today's arsenal of democracy is global. It's a testament to what we've built over the last 75 years, and it benefits us all. But remember, to have a healthy, resilient, thriving arsenal of democracy, we also need healthy, resilient, thriving democracies. The two are inseparable, because starting a business, investing in others, inventing a product and taking it to market depends on safeguarding the democratic principles and institutions that provide the blanket of liberty under which you do so. We want private sector innovation to succeed. We need the private sector to feel the same way about democracy, because neither can thrive unless the other survives, and we want both to continue to long endure. No democracy is immune from the authoritarian winds that sweep the globe. We have seen America and other allies tested routinely. While they have withstood, we cannot take that for granted. 75 years ago, when then U.S. President Truman spoke at the signing of the North Atlantic Treaty, he described some of the longstanding ties that bind NATO allies together, including, quote, a common heritage of democracy, individual liberty, and rule of law. He also said that with our common traditions, we face common problems. We are, to a large degree, industrial nations, and we face the problem of mastering the forces of modern technology in the public interest. To meet this problem successfully, he said, we must have a world in which we can exchange the products of our labor, not only among ourselves, but with other nations. That is why NATO was born all those decades ago, to provide the security on which our shared peace and prosperity depend. And that is why NATO will continue to live on for many decades to come. Thank you.